The format is very similar. There's a lot of friendly faces out there I recognise, so you probably know it as well as we do. But Mark is going to give a short presentation. We would then move into Q&A. I'll give you a bit of detail about how we want to handle that when we get to it, but I think by 7:20, 7:30 we'll start the Q&A. As I said, there will be questions online as well, which we'll deal with, intersperse those. And then that leaves us plenty of time, we hope, for Q&A. Usually we wrap up any time between 8:30 and 9 o'clock. Nearer 9 usually, I'm told. I can't remember, it's so enjoyable. So anyway, at that, I think that's enough from me. I could just hand over now to Mark to take you through his presentation. I hope you find it interesting. I'm sure you will. Thank you.
Thanks, John, and good evening, everyone. Delighted that you can be here. Our first one back face-to-face after a couple of online versions of this through COVID, so great to see you all here this evening. As I think you're probably aware, there's quite a lot going on in the world of Premiership Rugby and rugby more broadly at the moment, and I thought I would just take a few minutes to give you a bit of an overview of what we're seeing from club level, some of the challenges and opportunities that are out there, both for our league and then closer to home here in Northampton. I am naturally a glass half empty type guy, so I like being surprised positively and taking a fairly pessimistic view of things rather than the other way around. And so as I give you my sort of wandering description through Premiership Rugby, I'm going to start with some of the challenges that we're unquestionably facing, because I think it's really important to understand them to see how we can then navigate forward proactively. Fear not, I'm going to end with some good stuff, but I'm going to start by taking us through a journey on some of those challenges. It would be remiss of me really not to start with the situation at Wasps and Worcester. You know, very, very sad news to see two clubs fold in the way that they have over recent months. Very challenging for the league, and our thoughts, you know, remain with all of the staff and players and stakeholders associated with those clubs. Both effectively ran into really significant financial difficulties and were unable to wrestle their way out of those challenges. And I think it's important to note that whilst they've unquestionably faced extreme challenges in the short term, this isn't a new conundrum for Premiership Rugby. If you rewind to pre-COVID times, as distant as they may seem, the clubs collectively lost £45 million in the full year leading up to COVID. So for a while, there's been a distressed financial model that puts pressure on our league and our clubs. That was, of course, amplified through the pandemic itself. So the couple of years impacted by the pandemic, those losses grew from 45 million to about 100 million pounds across the club. That's a big number across 13 clubs. And on top of the 100 million of P&L losses, the clubs collectively borrowed just over 100 million of loans from government under this winter sports survival package. Unbelievably important to the clubs in the short term. That loan money, and we were one of the clubs that have borrowed from DCMS, helped us navigate the choppy waters at the time, but has saddled the clubs with some debt. That money has to be paid back. It wasn't a grant. And for many of the clubs, they already had really significant debt profiles. And so whilst this money was a godsend in the short term, it's just added to that debt burden that many of the clubs were carrying. And as such, I guess the key question is, are the clubs sustainable and is our game sustainable? That's the question we're all wrestling with, and we're spending a lot of time thinking about it, both at league level and here at club level. And I'll talk specifically how we're navigating that challenge in a second. To continue with the bad news, I guess, not only are we wrestling with the situation that we came out of COVID with, but we're now all in the grips of the cost of living crisis. And that has a really overt impact on us at Clubland. Firstly, our own cost base is increasing, right? Whether that's the price at which we buy beer or the price at which it costs us to turn on the floodlights for match days, etc. Our cost base is unquestionably increasing, in places aggressively. But also the cost of living crisis, unsurprisingly, puts pressure on people's disposable income, right? We're all worrying about our gas bills and filling up our car with petrol. And so those discretionary spend items, things like a ticket or a hospitality package or an extra T-shirt or the playing shirt, from our club shop become harder to justify. And we've seen a bit of that through the early games this season, particularly the first couple of games. Our attendances were down a little bit. I think we're about 500 season tickets lower than we were last season. And when we speak to people about that, the biggest, most common answer we get is around the cost of living crisis and therefore affordability. So we're challenged on multiple fronts, the COVID hangover and then the current cost of living crisis. There are some other challenges across the game that I think it's worth touching on. One that's really overt this year is the sort of club versus country debate. So if you're an England international player this season, you know, the pinnacle of our game, something that we want all of our players to aspire to, and let's say you're an England international and you're fit for the entire season, you could miss more than 50% of Saints matches this year because there are so many overlaps in the calendar given the season structure that we're left with. And I'm going to talk in a minute about lots of the positives for our league, but it's really hard to say we're the best league in the world when we're playing our matches so regularly in the shadow of international rugby. So how do we address that as a game? That challenge sort of rolls forward in another dimension as well, the audience perspective. So when England play their international matches, they're regularly filling Twickenham, that's fantastic. And the TV audiences can be really, really significant. We're aware that there are 8 or 9 million rugby fans in this country, a big number, a really healthy number, but many of them are just fans of the international game. And you've got some of our club sides really struggling to maintain their attendances, playing in big, empty, soulless stadiums, and that doesn't help you when you're trying to tell the story of this fantastic product that we've got. So how do we drag some of that audience from the international game and make the club game as compelling as possible to find those people and keep them and excite them for the future? And then I guess finally the sort of macro level challenge that I'll touch on is around player welfare. It's so critical that we get the player welfare model right. This slide focuses primarily on the concussion headlines that we've seen, and you know, this topic is one that's very, very close to our heart given what Steve Thompson's going through right now. But we have to get the player welfare model right more broadly in rugby, answer the questions diligently around whether too much rugby is being played, whether we've got the right technology and resources in place to manage specific issues like concussion. And if we don't get that right, then the consequences will be really significant. You know, imagine a world where the grassroots game for young kids is constrained because parents are having to sign waivers to allow their kids to play rugby. We've got to get the model right to allow the game to both thrive in the short term and therefore survive into the future. So lots of things that we're facing, and that's a fairly pessimistic starting point, deliberately. Things are going to get rosier this evening, trust me. And so let me sort of step out of my comfort zone and try and give a more balanced and more optimistic view on where we are, and I guess give a lens through how Saints are trying to address some of these challenges. Firstly, I think when the rugby is on, when the players are on the turf, when you are here watching the games, the product is fantastic at the moment. I've shown 2 metrics here on this slide. I could have shown any number. But in general, the games in the Premiership are getting closer. They're getting more competitive. They're decided by a smaller margin. I think this season, more than 50% of the games have finished with 2 teams within 7 points of each other. The rugby is competitive and compelling. And at the same time, the average number of tries per game is increasing rapidly. It's now higher than Super Rugby, right? You all think about Super Rugby and you think of basketball. We now score more tries per game here in the Premiership than they do in Super Rugby. The ball is in play for longer here in the Premiership than it is in any other league around the world. The metrics are really strong. It won't surprise you that whilst the average number of tries per game in the Premiership is 7.1, I think in any match involving Saints, it's about 9.6 at the moment. You'll form your own views on whether that's entertainment or stress, and Dowse will address that for us shortly, I am sure. But the product on the pitch is fantastic. The rugby is compelling, and we've got to bottle that, harness it, and grow it for the future. We're able now to show that fantastic product, show these fantastic matches to a growing audience. So by adding the coverage on ITV to the existing coverage on BT Sport, by making a streaming service available at league level, our TV audiences, the number of people that are engaging with our game week in, week out is growing. And that's really critical, not only because it helps us attract investment, but it's building the audience for the future. And without that, this game will not thrive. Coming closer to home, we talked about the devastating impact of COVID on many of the clubs around the country. And let's make no bones about it, COVID had a massive impact on us here at Saints. I think we lost around £11 million as a direct result of the COVID pandemic. But what we're really encouraged about has been our ability to bounce back and bounce back strongly. So we've just reported our financial results for last year. We recorded record turnover, the highest turnover the club has ever generated. So we've been able to bounce back strongly and try and future-proof our model to make sure that we can thrive into the future. How have we done that? We've spoken in the past about this virtuous circle between on-pitch performance and commercial performance. And I'm going to touch a bit on both of these things. Commercially, we've had a really strong run coming off the back of COVID. So last season, we were one of only 3 clubs across the Premiership to grow attendances to the level that they were prior to the pandemic. We've had some fantastic progress on the sponsorship front. Not everyone's a massive fan of this place being called the Cinch Stadium at Franklin's Gardens, but from a commercial and economic perspective, that deal is so critical to our future now, as is our ability to attract new investment through sponsors so that we can continue to grow this club effectively. It's been great having our community programs back up and running. They build our audience, but they also generate income into the club. We had the concerts restarting. We had a record year with our retail offer. So we're getting things firing again from a commercial perspective, and without that growth, you become very, very challenged. A key part of that growth is making sure the experience for all of you on a match day is right. And we know that we are not perfect on this run. I'm not trying to stand here and say that everything is rosy on a match day, and I'm sure we'll get into some of your thoughts on that as we go through this evening. But we spend a lot of time trying to understand what makes a difference here. What are the things that delight our supporter base, and what are the things that, quite frankly, make you boil under the collar. We survey after every game, and we use an external firm to help us benchmark that against other clubs and other sports and other brands and products. And whilst we're far from perfect, there's been good progress on the feedback that we're getting. So we're being told that lots of what we're doing on a match day is heading in the right direction. Not all of it is for everyone. It's very, very difficult to please 14,000 people with everything that you do. But we're encouraged by the results. And when you line us up against some of these other brands and some of these other propositions, whilst we realise there's room to grow, we think we're heading in the right direction. One of the other things we're trying to do to engage with the supporter base is to create more compelling content, so to create a stronger attachment between our fan base and the club, even on the days when you're not here sitting in your seats watching the rugby. And so we've invested quite a lot over the last few months in content. Hopefully some of you have seen the behind-the-scenes stuff we've put out. We did some great clips of Luds talking to the troops in the changing room before the Newcastle game last season. We put one out about the semi-final at Tigers. We did the Blackiston Challenge. And we're going to give you a very, very short sneak peek of something that's going to be coming out very soon. We've had our team embedded with the Barbarians ahead of the fixture that we played on Saturday. And I think we'll flick up Woody in his element to give you a sense of what's to come on that front.
As you see their bench walking down the tunnel, there wasn't a smile amongst them, eh? They are stressed, their pressure is going to build and build on them. We keep smiling, we keep trying stuff. Boys, just before we go, one thing that will be true is they'll be having a bollocking in there, they'll probably tighten their game up, they'll come more direct, so we're going to bar up, we've got to chop them.
More chances to bang it! Yes!
That is Tom Wood. The game is going to miss him. But that was half-time in the Barbarians changing room. So we've had someone in camp all week, and we're packaging this up into a nice story that will give you a brilliant insight into, well, the Barbarians specifically and elite rugby more broadly. Content is really key for us. We've got to use it to be able to build our audience and engage you as our most loyal supporters to keep that attachment to the club. Turning to where we're at on the pitch, obviously we were delighted to make the semi-final last year, but I think the overarching emotion was one of frustration and disappointment. We turned up at that semi-final not feeling like we were the plucky underdogs. We felt like that was a chance to win the title. And that's driven a lot of anger and a lot of frustration at the club in recent months, and has driven a lot of our preparation for the season ahead. We feel like we're making progress. We are not the finished article, and I'm sure we'll talk about that in more detail. There's still too much inconsistency in our game. But I think you'll agree we're making progress, and we're doing so playing a fantastic brand of rugby that the coaching group deserve huge credit for. Hopefully it keeps you entertained and excited, even though not every result goes our way. We're particularly proud of the way we're building our squad. We've spoken here about our strategy of young English and high potential at the core of our squad for a number of years now. And we are streets ahead of the other clubs in our league in terms of the proportion of our squad that's homegrown. Nearly 70% of our senior squad this year is homegrown. That's an extremely healthy number compared to the other clubs around the league. Something we're incredibly proud of, and something for which Mark Opley and the academy team deserve a lot of credit for, as they work tirelessly to find and then develop talent all around our region. And what better way to showcase what we're doing to bring players through than to have so many of our squad involved with England at the moment. 8 players who've been named in the extended England squads for this season. Injuries have curtailed some of the appearances so far. But what an amazing journey that these guys have been on, many of whom have come through our academy. And I guess we were particularly proud as a club when, during last season we had Biggs, and we're probably not allowed to show his face around here anymore, but when we had Biggs and Courtney captaining their countries, just again a fantastic expression of some of the good things that we think we're doing from a performance perspective here at Northampton Saints. So not where we want to be yet on the playing side, but really encouraging progress. And I'd like to congratulate Dowse, who I think has done a brilliant job in seamlessly transitioning the leadership group in rugby as Chris moved on and moved back to New Zealand. That's been seamless from a club perspective, and I'm sure Dingers can talk about that later if questioned, what that transition has looked like. So not where we want to be, but heading in the right direction. More broadly, as I sort of draw this ramble through what we're up to a close, we're making really good strides in some of our other activities across the club too. Really pleased with the progress we've made in women's rugby. It's been a question that we've received here a lot in the past. What are we doing in that space? How are we going to move to the top of the game? I was actually down in Twickenham today because we're in a joint bid with Loughborough to make sure that we're part of the next iteration of the Premier 15s, the elite women's competition. And one of the most pleasing things about what we're doing is the impact it's having on the grassroots game across our region. Back in 2018, we hosted our first ever girls-only rugby camp, and I think we had 11 girls sign up. This summer, we had about 120. We had the Loughborough team coaching there. The power of the role models like Emily Scarrett and Sarah Hunter is just unquestionable. And we now need to build that to make sure we've got a strong pathway so that we can continue to compete with our partner team, Loughborough Lightning, at the top of the women's game. Elsewhere, our wheelchair rugby team goes from strength to strength. So Premiership champions last year, beat Tigers in the final, qualified for the first ever European elite wheelchair rugby competition, annoyingly finished runners-up, 2 Tigers, who'd been on a bit of a recruitment blitz since the Premiership loss. But the club is driving more and more interest and insight, and again is driving participation in this fantastic sport across the region. And then our community programs more broadly, we've been able to switch a lot of this stuff back on post-COVID. And I think over the past 12 months, we've engaged with about 15,000 people across our region on rugby-specific programs, but also supported by educational programs and initiatives, mental health initiatives. So as a club that was born out of community impact back in 1880, we remain really proud of the impact that we have across the community. Finally, we are looking to the future in everything that we do, and part of that is about making sure that our facilities are robust and are future-proofed. And I don't know whether many of you have been out the back to our training pitches, but our new high-performance indoor training centre is springing up at a rate of knots now. I've got a bet on with Dowse. He doesn't think it's going to be ready until at least Easter, but the 3rd of February is what we're shooting for. So this is a half-pitch indoor training facility. Yeah, slipping a little. This will transform what we're able to do on site. In the winter months, historically, we've had to go off-site to the university to train. This gives us a fantastic all-weather facility, not just for our own use, but also to add to that community engagement too. So making sure we're future-proofed, giving us the performance resources to be able to continue to deliver at the highest level. So that is a rapid canter through where we've come from. And I started by saying that I'm a glass half empty guy, but I think there are lots and lots of reasons to be optimistic. There are some challenges and some headwinds, unquestionably, at Premiership rugby level, but there's a lot to be positive about. And I think we as a board, as an executive team, and as a staff here at Northampton Saints, feel really confident in the strategy that we've got in place, which is where I'll leave you. This hasn't changed significantly over the years, and I think that is a result of the fact that we feel like we're making progress. We believe that this is the right strategy to have in place. We're still shooting to be the best on and off the pitch in Europe, but we want to combine that with being the beating heart of our community, Northampton, Northamptonshire and beyond. We know we have a positive impact here, and we have to harness that. In order to achieve that objective, we've got to be more consistent on pitch. We need to be challenging for the major honours year in, year out. That's tough, right? We're not the highest spenders in the league. I think last season, Bristol and London Irish were spending a couple of £1 million more than us. But we believe we've got the bones of what we need to be successful with an incredibly talented squad and a really high-class coaching unit. To thrive and survive in the future, though, we have to be sustainable from a financial perspective, and we're making good progress on that front. And then we've talked at length about the community impact. So we think this is the right strategy. We think we're headed in the right direction, but we're under no illusions. We're not the finished article yet, but we're very excited that you're coming on that journey with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. I'm sure you found that very interesting. Certainly exciting times ahead. It's a great position we're in as a springboard to move forward. So, at this point, I would like to open for Q&A. As I said, few rules really. If you have a question, put your hand up and I will get a roving mic to you. And then if you could just say your name and give us your question. As I said, we've got some questions online, and we'll be interspersing those. There was one came through which I thought was appropriate to start with, that will warm Phil Dowson up. One came through online just before the meeting. And this is from a Colin Bonnet. And this is, as I say, a good one for you, Phil, so listen carefully. It seems to be a recurring issue for Saints that whilst we are able to play some superb attacking rugby at times, our Achilles heel always seems to be that we don't kill teams off when given the opportunity. And far too many times we go into the last 10 minutes of a game with all three results still achievable. I was wanting to know how the team and coaches are working to rectify this and allow us to win more of these games. The Saracens game this season would be an obvious example of this. Over to you.
I was wondering how long it would take before the Saracens game would get mentioned. So thanks, John. Straight off the bat. We, as a performance group, had a off-site half-term sort of report of last week during the Barbarians week in terms of having a downtime from the league, in which we would go through both statistically and with the players who weren't on international duty their overriding and overbearing sort of emotional feel of how we've gone in the first half of the season. And not to steal Mark's sort of presentation there, but it gives you both huge amount of hope and an incredible amount of frustration. So we're hopeful because in all the games bar Bath, which was an aberration, we've taken points from the games and we've been in the games. The frustration is that we probably should have won 3 more of those games, particularly when we've been so far ahead. And also Sale and Quins, where if the game had been on 2 minutes longer, I'm pretty sure we would have won them. So in terms of how we are not winning those games, and we talk about the Saracens game, is that we have substantial periods of pressure where we look world class, but we don't convert enough of that pressure into points. Some of that comes down to maul from 5 yards out. Some of that comes down to just not being clinical enough. And the flip side of that is when other sides have pressure, we concede too easily. And it's going to sound like a really obvious answer, but we don't score enough and we concede too many. What seems to happen, though, is that happens in periods of time. So So we can go through periods of time where we score 21 points unanswered and then concede 21 points unanswered. So it's these swings and momentums that we talk about. And it's not one single facet of our game from a technical or tactical point of view. So we can look at the line out, and at times the line out isn't good enough. We can look at the scrum, and at certain games that hasn't been good enough. But on the flip side, at other games it has been. And so it's not one single thing that we can say, here's what we're going to spend all our time on. It's a mindset, it's a character set, it's a belief in our system and our play, and it's a consistency issue across all the facets of the game. That makes it pretty hard just to nail down and say, here's what we're going to work on, but also makes it incredibly heartening and gives me a huge amount of confidence that actually there's not a side in the league that I fear. There's not a side in the league that I don't think we can go home or away and beat. And at some point, I think we're going to mature from a decision-making point of view, from a belief point of view, from a coaching and playing point of view, to actually give some of these sides a hiding and achieve some of the results that we feel we've let slip this year.
Thanks, Phil. Any questions from the floor at the moment? Somebody got there? Right. Have we got? Where's gentleman here on this front table? Yeah. Okay. Just getting a mic to you. We're a bit slow at the minute. We'll speed up.
Question for Phil, really. How disruptive was it to lose Dan Biggar when we did, and then have another 10 come in who inevitably has a slightly different style of play?
It was disruptive, and that obviously that's a big question in terms of when Mark says, listen, this is what's happening. I had a conversation. Dan has been brilliant with me in terms of his honesty and openness, and I said, you know, next year, for whatever reason, you're not going to be contracted at the Saints. And he was very, very open and mature and very complimentary about the club as well. Then an offer comes in from Toulon that's contingent of him going now, and it's Biggs that raised that offer. It's not us pushing him out the door. He has raised that with Mark originally and said, you know, there's an offer on the table here that I think is great opportunity for me and the family to go and finish my career, you know, depending on how long he plays for, playing in a place with an opportunity that, you know, I don't really want to turn down. Now, in any other normal season where clubs don't go under, then that's obviously a serious no-go, and I don't think Biggs even mentions it. But in a season where Worcester go under and we have the opportunity to sign Finn Smith and get him on board immediately, it makes sense for Dan Biggar because he wanted to take that opportunity. It makes sense for the club because as of September, we are very happy to have Finn Smith as one of our 10s, and we see a huge amount of potential in him. And so therefore, it made perfect sense from both sides of the argument. Now, how disruptive it was, I would have to, at this point, credit Finn Smith in how quickly he's come in and started playing very well. And how he, from a very young gentleman, has shown exactly why Sam Smith has been drooling over him for the last 2 seasons. And I think that also speaks of the work we've done in recruitment and trying to get him on board. And although it's unusual, although it's not ideal, I don't think, from a rugby point of view, particularly with, you know, clubs going under, which Mark's alluded to, I think in terms of that transition, it has been very healthy in terms of getting Finn in early and giving Biggs the opportunity to do what he wanted to do.
Hi, Lee Moss. Mark, people in your position have to make 5-year strategies, unfortunately. So getting your crystal ball out, you've talked about the problems. How do you see the makeup of the squad, the salaries, the fixture list, and all those big decisions in season 27-28?
Crikey, it's hard enough looking at next week, let alone 27-28. I think I've alluded to some of those points in the presentation. There are a lot of moving parts right now. And I think our mindset at Saints is control what we can control and try and do that as well as we can. That's why having a really clear 5-year plan, 5-year strategy in place makes sense. And as I said, we're pleased because we think that strategy is relevant and we think that we are making good progress against it. The pillars are the important ones. Do well on the pitch, make sure we've got a model that is sustainable from a financial perspective and continue to have a massive impact on the community. We're very focused on doing those things. At the same time, we're really intent on supporting the league to make a series of correct and very important decisions in terms of what the future of our game looks like. And there are a million examples we could refer to on that front. I think one of the really important ones at the moment is the structure of the league and how many teams there will be in it. Hello? Oh, move forward. We've actually been advocates for a while of the potential of a smaller league, because some of the challenges I touched on, the overlaps with the international window, player welfare, get a little bit easier to manage if you've got a slightly smaller league. And if you've got a slightly smaller league, you can do that bigger and better when you avoid some of those challenges. So we're definitely open to a prospect of a smaller league, but there's a lot that we need to work through to make sure that's a really sensible set of decisions and that it works at both league level and club level. So we don't have a crystal ball. It's really hard to know exactly what things will look like, but take care of our own business, and hopefully our strategy will enable us to do that, and then work with the league to make sure we're making sensible decisions.
Thanks, Mark. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Well, it's as specific as we can be. Yeah, yeah.
James.
One over here somewhere. Yep, okay.
It's probably to Mark and to Douse. With the senior rugby struggling in grassroots, what can the Saints do to help propel it forward and keep them going? We're now seeing most senior teams struggling to get out 1 or 2 sides a week, where before pandemic we were getting 2 to 3. What the Saints can do going forward to help drive that and keep it going?
I'll take a stab first. I mean, I think our job is to provide. One of our jobs is to provide icons and role models that inspires the next generation of rugby players. If we've got brilliant players here showcasing a fantastic brand of rugby that people want to watch, hopefully that also translates into an ability for the clubs to capture interested people in playing the game and have them come back week in, week out. I think that's particularly effective at the younger age groups. But you know, in order to have a thriving senior team, you've got to have a thriving grassroots model. And so we certainly feel a responsibility to try and inspire that next generation. And that should work for the clubs, but it's also critical to what we're doing. I've talked about controlling the things that we can control. And it's absolutely essential that we inspire and motivate and captivate 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12-year-olds, because they are our supporters of the future. They are potentially our players of the future. And they are unquestionably our advocates of the future, because they can go and talk to other people about the brilliant experience that they have here or at other clubs. So that doesn't touch specifically. I'm not clear enough on the specific challenges at the senior game, but I think we have a massive role to play in inspiring that next generation.
Yeah, to follow on to that, I say we can win. People want to be associated with success, whether it's grassroots rugby or sponsors or season ticket holders. And I think a successful Saints side means that grassroots rugby becomes very popular. Likewise, I think showing success stories of local guys playing for their local club and being successful, I think, is another one that's very important. And plus, we have a community department in the club that goes out into these clubs to try and generate energy and interest in the sport, which, regardless of whether it's Northampton Saints or Worcester Warriors, is obviously integral moving forward.
Just on that, Mark, we've seen junior rugby falling year on year and year on year. So it's the community is going forward with what the Saints are doing, but what else can the Saints do to help drive that? Because, like you said, if we don't go from the bottom to the top, we're not going to have a top anymore. So junior rugby and mini rugby, especially, I'm looking at Northamptonshire and I look after Rugby Rugby Club and I help the minis and juniors there. We're thriving, to be fair, but many teams are not. So what else can we do from the Saints and to the community to help drive that forward?
Well, again, it's disappointing and surprising to hear you mention that. And again, if I look through the lens of what are the things that we can do directly, control the controllables, get a microphone that works effectively. We're seeing growth in our programs that are targeted at young people. And so I guess we look at that and say, there's lots of healthy signs about the game, because if we can attract people to come on our camps, that can only help other organisations. I take my little 5-year-old to Long Buckby. Sorry, that's probably the enemy. But I'm always astounded by how many people are there. It's really busy. In fact, there's probably too many kids for the number of coaches. Yeah, I think the clubs have got to have a well-orchestrated programme, and we've got to inspire the next generation.
Okay, thank you. We've got one just come in online from Jim Bryce, which I'll read out. We have seen with the failure of Wasps and Worcester Warriors that the clubs have multiple layers of companies. For example, players' contract company, stadium ownership company, etc. Are the Saints a single limited company, or are they multiple companies? I think that's one for me. Yeah, well, I'm pleased to say that we do not have a complicated structure here at Northampton. Anybody who wants some good bedtime reading, the accounts have been published this week, which I have a copy of here. They're on the website, so you don't have to be a shareholder to get access to them. And you will see that we have full transparency. We are one company. In fact, there's the group, which is the group that controls the trading company, which is Northampton Saints PLC. But everything we do have and operate in is all included in there. So I'm pleased to say we're as crystal clear as anybody can be. So I hope that answers your question, Jim. Where I don't know whether you're in the room as well, but that I can't put it any clearer than that. And as I say, I recommend this is a very good read if you can understand some of the accountancy jargon. But there we go. Right, any more questions from the room at the minute? Oh, this gentleman here. Sorry, I forgot.
Sorry, I squeezed through.
You do. No, I'm sorry for streaming. We want to put you. Just hold on. It's here. Here comes Jack.
Okay. Cheers, Jack. Yeah. Question for Dowson and Mark. The salary cap is reducing. What impact will this have on recruiting the likes of Dan Biggar in the future? Equally, what impact in competing in Europe, and particularly against the French teams who have a sizable salary caps?
It has a big impact on the recruitment in terms of what you can and can't spend, clearly. And I think what makes it more confusing, and Mark again made the point previously, is that we actually don't know what the salary cap will be definitely moving forward. And so what you see with some sides, not to mention any names, would lowball for next year and then highball for the following years because they presume that the cap's going to go up, etc. So I think it does create headaches in that space, but I also think that if there's somebody of outstanding character and outstanding quality, then I think it still gives you particularly with the marquee option, it still gives you the opportunity to do that. I think if I touch on recruitment on a broader scale, then you probably get more of an idea, but the two best and most successful over the last 20 years, I'd say, rugby sides would be Leinster and Canterbury Crusaders, technically. I think there's other sides who've had peaks and troughs, but they both recruit and have a core group that come through their academy system. Now, Leinster are blessed with a lot of private schools and universities that give them a feed into that, likewise Canterbury. But I definitely agree, having chatted to Stuart Lancaster about it, when he asked the Leinster players who they wanted to play for, and they said Leinster, that's a very powerful, cohesive factor. And so our model is to have, and Mark mentioned it with Mark Hopley and his academy team, is to have a very, very proficient and heavily invested in academy procedures, so that we get a group of players who all come through the system together, who know the Saints way, who play for their local club, who know each other inside out from training, from socialising, from living together. and then we then recruit into positions that we don't or can't produce those players. So we then look outside of that sphere for high quality in those areas. Now that again depends on the crop of players coming through, who's actually coming into the system from Oundle, Rugby School, any of the rugby clubs that we mentioned in terms of ONs or scouts or whatever else. And then who actually in what position and what character and what age profile and what leadership profile. And we do this on a stats base and a character base. Who do we need to add to the squad that can help that? And so that's our model. And so I don't think it precludes us from getting it done bigger. It does make it probably slightly more difficult from a financial aspect. What I always tell the players, and they always ignore me, is the value of a contract isn't always in the pound sign. And I think what we can offer at the club is we want to develop people, whether they are Dan Biggar or whether they are George Hendy. We want to make sure they get better. It's a big thing of Sam Vesti's. And he goes on at the players that it's their career, and we want to make them better and better and better and keep them improving. And that's how we see guys like Alex Coles and Dave Ribbons play for England in the last month, is because that academy system's working, and fair play to it in terms of doing that. Now, sometimes that's ugly, and guys have to sink or swim when they get thrown in because we don't have a huge squad with guys that we sign in over the top. But in the long run, I think it's very effective.
I think if I could just add to that, it's so refreshing to hear the director of rugby talking about the salary cap and the recruitment of players in such a vein. We're not blessed by being an open checkbook club. We have to manage our resources. We have to get best value, and we know by the amount we spend on players compared to the position we're fourth at the moment. Obviously, there's be some movement over the next few weeks, and we punch above our weight, and that's what we want. Chris, when he came here, he was under no misapprehension about that. And he set this culture up, and it's great that Phil's thing can, answer that in such a way that, for me, it gives me great confidence about the future. Because if I come back to the gentleman who was asking a question about what happens in 27, 28, what we need to be is a sustainable operation, a sustainable business, but still compete at the best level we can on the park. And I guess the final point about it is an observation I would make is those clubs that spend the most do not always finish in the top six. There's one or two clubs that have been spending the most for the last 10 years and still not had any success. So it's more than just the amount of the cap, whether we spend to it, how much we spend. It's having the sort of attitude and approach that Phil's just outlined, which I think we should all take some comfort from. Okay, any more questions from the floor?
I think there is one over there.
Sorry, I'm not spotting very well tonight.
Charles McGilvray. It sort of goes over the similar questions just then, but I think the club should be applauded for the young English high potential. I think it's fantastic what the club's doing, and this is probably one of the strongest squads the club's had in a long time. But within the dynamics of the squad, it is a young potential, high potential with an emerging leadership group, but there seems to be a real girth of individuals who have actually gone over and won it. Within the entire environment, you can count it on one hand, obviously including yourself, Dowson, in that. But is there not a need for more proven title winners within that sort of environment?
I think there's an old Alan Hansen thing about that, is there? The one thing I would say, and it was actually a question that was on the pack that was sent out to me to prepare me for you monsters, was when are we going to start winning stuff? And we talk all the time about this development model and about the guys coming together. And actually, the heartbreaking loss at Saracens, and as painful as it was, is one of the elements of adversity that will make us stronger. I firmly believe that. And I think if we can sit through some of those absolutely horrific games and listening to some of the players talk about it and some of the coaches talk about it afterwards, I think that those sorts of games are the building blocks of what makes clubs special. And I think Saracens have been playing the same way for 10 years. Anyone who goes into that system knows exactly how they're going to play. Leicester have taken all risk out of their game so that it becomes a very simple game and they know exactly what they're doing. We play a slightly different brand of rugby, more akin to Quinn's, and it's going to take time for us to really work out exactly what that looks like. And when I say time, I mean seasons. And it's not for the short. It's not a short, quick fix. Let's buy somebody. It's a long-term develop, and when it comes, it'll be that much more powerful and have that much more longevity because it has been organic. And again, I believe that, but it's very easy for me to sit here and say that in my first season, but I do believe that in terms of the way teams are modelled. You look at the England team that won the 2003 World Cup and how many times and how many players got drilled in Australia by 100 points, and how many of those players like Johnny played in the 2003 World Cup, having had 4 years together with heartbreaking losses against Wales at Wembley. That's the point, because when it comes big, and it's very powerful.
Thanks. We've got another one that's just come in from Alan Shalwell. I think it's one for you, Mark. I feel the players prefer to play in a stadium which is nearly full to capacity. Has anyone thought about keeping the ticket price to a minimum? For season ticket holders, I would then suggest you offer, as you did post-COVID, with the 3 options, and the members would then decide which of the options they would take.
Thanks, John. Just actually as a segue into answering the question, it's probably the first time we've been face-to-face in a forum like this since COVID, and we know that when we went out and lost matches during COVID, a number of you felt like you were in a position to be able to donate the value of the matches that you weren't able to attend into the club, and that had just an unbelievable impact on our ability to navigate those choppy waters. So firstly, I thank you for that. We certainly wouldn't be in the position that we're in today if that hadn't been the case. The pricing is always a tricky conundrum, right? And we spend a lot of time thinking about pricing, and we spend a lot of time thinking about value for money, because that's slightly different but just as important. We have both some of the lowest prices in the league. I think there are 2 clubs that offer one type of ticket that is cheaper than our lowest price ticket. And we also have some prices towards the upper end. And that is deliberate. It's a deliberate strategy to give different people a choice of options and a choice of seats so that they can then make their choice. What we've learned through doing a lot of analysis and some testing over the time is that there's not a huge amount of elasticity in our pricing. So if we drop the prices, it doesn't necessarily mean that we start selling 30% more tickets. It just doesn't work like that. And given the financial situation that we've described, we have to be very conscious of trying to generate the revenue to keep the club going. And so we feel like we offer value for money, and that there are a choice of price points out there to suit different people. Having paid 150 quid to go and watch England at Twickenham recently, I think you get better value here than you do at Twickenham. But everyone will form their own view on that. We think we've got a reasonable pricing model, and we hope that you feel like it's value for money.
Any more questions out there? Oh yes, the gentleman here, Jack.
Yep. Sorry. Thank you. Matthew Bloomer. One thing that disappeared with COVID, I think, and as far as I'm aware hasn't come back yet, is the A-League. How much is this missed both from the commercial side of the club and from the playing side of the club? And what's the view on its return?
From a playing side, yeah, there's nothing coherent in English rugby. I'll stick to English rugby rather than go anything further. There's nothing coherent for the players who aren't in the first team in terms of their development. The best way to get good at rugby, I believe, is by playing rugby. And there's lots of guys at different clubs get stuck in gyms and then don't actually get better quicker by having those experiences on a rugby pitch. The A-League at the time was great for that, both to get those guys playing and to get them playing in a Saints shirt, and I think that was incredibly powerful in terms of they had their own, as the Wanderers had their own identity within the squad, and that became powerful, particularly for training. When the Wanderers were training against the first team and there was clearly positions up for grabs, that was a competitive edge that we enjoyed. In terms of what's been happening since, and Mark can fill you in on the logistical side, is that we've teamed up with Bedford, again, to give those guys the opportunity. And that's not just the opportunity to play week in, week out, which is absolutely integral, but also to enjoy rugby for what it is and to have a beer on the bus with Mike and to go to places like Ampthill to understand what club rugby means, and I think that's important for a younger generation as well, to get guys back playing after long injury. So Carl Wilkins this weekend, who's had a shocker of a run in injury terms, to get him back on a pitch and getting his lungs back. Anyone who's played knows you can do as much fitness as you want. There's nothing like match fitness. And so at the moment we're one of the few clubs that has a really coherent pathway in terms of how we manage our players' training load. We spend a lot of time as a coaching group deciding who plays where. So we have guys playing at Cambridge, at Loughborough, at Hinckley, at Old Albanians, as well as Bedford, because, as I mentioned, with regards to recruitment and performance in 3-4 years' time, they're the key stepping stones that we need to have those guys playing well. So although the A-League's not there, there is a very, very clear pathway from the club's point of view as to what these guys look like. The senior coaches and the academy coaches will go through those players' games to make sure we're getting what we call our IDP, our individual development plan for those guys sorted out. And so although there's no A-League, and that is frustrating, there is a pathway. The second thing is the PRC plays a big role in that space, because although that pathway is great, it doesn't have the guys playing together at the Gardens in a Saints shirt. And I also think that's an important thing, and I think you see the way those guys have played in the PRC tournament, how passionate they are about playing for the club and how important it is, and how much the fans have enjoyed seeing them as well, particularly when we drill Quins and we go up to Newcastle and get a tough win away from home. They're great life lessons for those guys in their rugby journey, and it's great to be a part of that from a coaching point of view, to see the energy that those young boys bring.
I think just on the second part of the question, the commercial side, the Wanderers games, we got really good crowds here relative to the other clubs who were staging second team games, but you know, it was 1,000 to 1,500 people, so they're not really making a significant difference commercially in terms of income generation or profit generation to the club. Where we missed them, though, is that they gave you another fantastic opportunity to engage with your supporter base. We know that lots of you love those games. It was another chance to come down here to Franklin's Gardens and see some rugby. And so one of the things we haven't done, we certainly haven't done well, is find a way of replicating that either through something similar or a different experience. So we missed them from the calendar, we missed them from a point of engagement, but it hasn't really had a material commercial impact per se.
One over there.
Tim Briggs. Dowse, it seems to be the case that when we get a yellow card, the wheels come off. Do you have any comments?
My initial comment would be I totally agree. We are the most... We've conceded the most yellow cards, 11 in the league thus far, which is frankly unacceptable. So that's one of the things we spoke about last week in terms of how we manage that and how we monitor that. We're also highest when we do concede in terms of the points we concede in those periods of time. Some of that is based on 2 at once against Leicester. Give me all the good games to remember. And so that is slightly inflated, but what the club and what the coaching group, particularly Sam, has been very good at is identifying a problem, training the problem, and then performing to acknowledge that. So one of the things we have spoken about this week with what we call the game drivers, which is effectively the senior leaders on the pitch, is what we do in those yellow card moments, how we play the game, how we manage losing a hooker, how we manage losing a 9, what the backfield coverage looks like if we lose a fullback. And so just trying to put some protocols around that, and you may say it's a bit late for that, but it comes to a point where you have to decide if you've got limited time each week in training, we have to understand what we need to train, and so give fewer away, concede fewer points when we do. And again, we're having blocks in training where there's a yellow card protocol. Here's what we're going to do. Here's the scenario in the game, and I'm fairly confident that we'll get better at managing that in that situation.
Fraser, would you like to comment a bit about that? The question of yellow card.
Thanks for involving me, John. Yes, I think just to add on top of that from Dowse, it is something we're working on in training, and unfortunately, inevitably, there are going to be moments in the game where we will give away penalty issues, and there will be cards. It's how we then, as a group on the pitch, navigate that 10 minutes. And I think Dows's point around us preparing for it in the week is something that we're really working hard at, and there are blocks put into training to navigate and for us to practice under all scenarios, whether it's we're chasing down a game with 3 points to go, 3 minutes to go, sorry, and we're down by one score, or we're down to 40 men and we've lost our line-out caller, for example. So that's first aspect, is that we are working at it. The thing I would say around us as a team seeming like the wheels are coming off, I wouldn't say it's that. I think what it is that, similar to Dows's point earlier on in this Q&A, that we're a team that have a style that has more risk than other teams, and I think that for certain teams, losing a man doesn't make as much of a difference. And if you look at teams, so for example Leicester, who have very little risk in their game, they resort back to kicking it even more and putting the fundamentals of their game is kick chase and trapping teams in their half. So for us, it's how we can learn to accept that we're losing a man, but not necessarily lose the key fundamentals of our game, which is playing fast, still attacking to space with one less man.
Thank you, Verita. Thank you. We've got what is a fairly lengthy question come in from Paul Hetherington. And I'm not going to read it all out, but I'll read an extract. Some of it is not particularly friendly, let's put it that way. Is it possible to tone down shouty man? I assume he's talking about Peter, who's done such a great job taking over from Jeff Allen. But anyway, we do not need saints screamed at us at every opportunity. We know who we are supporting. We are not 9-year-olds, and this is not an NFL or worse Saracens. Mark, what do you say?
Thank God we're not Saracens. Look, this is a tricky one because, we, like lots of people in this room, adored listening to Jeff when he was doing the announcing. Jeff chose to hang up his boots at an appropriate time. And I probably won't make myself too popular here, but I actually find this question quite disrespectful. Pete Nuttall, our announcer, is bloody good at what he does. We get lots of comments, positive comments about Pete. The disrespectful bit for me is this piece around being shouty, because I've watched as many games as anyone in this room, probably more here. I can't remember any time Pete shouting or certainly encouraging the crowd to shout Saints. So we get frustrated by this. And the reason we get good comments about Pete is because he never makes any mistakes. He's accurate, he's consistent. And whilst Paul might not be 9, we're trying to attract a lot of 9-year-olds. That's a key part of our strategy. So if a 9-year-old likes what he's doing, then that's all fine with us. We'd rather not piss anyone else off in the process, but we've got to make sure these 9-year-olds are happy. And I guess to reinforce one of the reasons we like Pete and we'd rather... and we get frustrated at a question like this, is take the Barbarians weekend that we've just had. I don't know how many of you were here, but hopefully some of you that were heard the really heartfelt interview with Dan Bigger at half-time, fully orchestrated by Pete. That was planned. Hopefully a number of you also heard the interview that Pete did completely unprompted and unscripted with Woody at the end of the game, which I thought was magnificent and gave Woody, one of the icons of this club, a magical moment to say thank you to the supporters that have been turning up to watch him week in, week out for many years. So, look, we like Pete. We're also acutely aware he is not Jeff Allen. He's never designed to be Jeff Allen, and he never claims to be Jeff Allen. Jeff was fantastic in his own right, but we're happy with Pete. We've got no intention to change him. I don't think he's shouty. I don't think most people think he's shouty. So long live Pete.
I think that's answered that one very nicely. Thanks. Right. Any more questions from the floor? Yes, one there.
John Palmer. I sit in the stands and I hear, like many people, going boo at the referee and complaining about interpretation. All of you, what would you change in the rules or the interpretation of the rules to make it much more clear and customer friendly to the supporters?
Yeah, I think I said it in a post-match interview. I'm never ever going to bag the referees ever. Primarily because until we're perfect, it's slightly contradictory. So once I've coached the perfect week and we've played the perfect game, then I'll be in a position to I can slag off the referees. The problem with the game is it is so complex and there's so much to referee. And I think one of the problems is every single breakdown could be interpreted differently by a different referee. And those inconsistencies are where the frustration comes from. I think as a coaching group, it's sometimes hard to keep it in mind, but we generally think that it all comes around. We've had some good ones, we've had some bad ones, and you just got to live with it and just get on with it and not whinge or moan or do it in private. But I think if I was going to change anything, it would always be around the tackle situation. I would change them all just because I used to coach and it's painful seeing the guys come around the side. We don't coach that. It's fairly frustrating, but there's more breakdowns than anything else in the game, more than scrums, more than lineouts, more than anything else. And I think on a global picture, with Mark talking about what's happened to Worcester and WAS and the fact that this isn't just clubs being inefficiently managed financially, it's an industry that's hemorrhaging cash from, New Zealand PRC or IPL, what's it called? New Zealand. For Super Rugby and the Mitre Cup and that, nobody's making money in the whole global business. And so if we want that to happen, we have to create something that's worth watching. And I think the best way to do that would be to clean up the breakdown. Now, there's loads of other elements, like scrummaging can become interminable, and maybe you have a scrum referee and, all this sort of stuff. But then to the point where it has to be, you have to make it accessible down the leagues as well. I think bringing in more referees and more logistics around the game, I think would be a difficult thing to replicate further down the leagues as well. But I think if you want to make something that's worth watching, you have to change the way the breakdowns refereed.
I think from my point of view, and I'm no expert in this, I did play many years ago and I've watched it a long, long time. I think the game is well refereed in the main. It's such a difficult job to do, and when your team's on the wrong end of a decision, it's easy to blame the referee and say how rubbish he was. But I think we actually, it's not too bad a situation. In my personal opinion, I get as annoyed as anybody when things go against us. The only thing I'd say I've learned is because it's so difficult to referee, and I listen to Ben Kay on the TV explaining the intricacies about mauls and rucks and all the other sorts of things, and I get even more confused. What it's done for me is to stop me shouting at the referee, because I'm never sure of which laws changed over the in between seasons. And so my advice is, if you're not sure of your ground, keep quiet about it. But anyway, that's my steer on it. I know it probably doesn't answer your question or help very much, but that's where I sit with it.
I agree with what's been said. Dow said that the scrum can be interminable. I think there's only one way to change that, which is whenever there's a scrum, we should allow Pete Nuttall, our fantastic announcer, to step aside, hand the mic to Matt Ferguson, because if that man can't get you excited about a scrum, then no one can, quite frankly.
I think the other interesting observation is this weekend, a lot of you will have been here for the Barbars game. There was no TMO, which was quite refreshing, I felt. And certainly the referee reffed it in the spirit of the game. And, you hardly knew he was there, really. It was brilliant. So, right, any more questions from a gentleman over there? Thanks. Thanks, Jack.
Hi, Kim Stott. You just actually mentioned it, John, about TMO and the sort of length of time that these decisions seem to take. Phil, are you sort of happy with how long that does take? And at the end of it, they sometimes don't come up with the right decision. An example being the away match at Bath, when our friend got sort of, or should have got sent off, and potentially we had a chance to get up the field and win the game.
Just to touch on that Bath one, that Bath incident was shocking, and I was fairly vociferous to the Chris White that week. Paul Hull was away, but he was head of the referees that week. Because the transcript came back when we reviewed that, and I don't know how much Dingers knows about this, but Dingers went up, and I'll apologise for both mine and his language now, and said, "I've just been effing elbowed in the head." And the referee said, "We're checking it," and they were actually checking the head-on-head collision in the tackle. I don't know, I can't remember who you tackled. Do you remember who you tackled? So tackling Ollie Lawrence, slight clash of heads. When Dingers is on the floor, Atwood drops the elbow on him a couple of times. And there's 5, 6 different angles of it that I got sent through on the Monday following, and I phoned up and I was fairly annoyed that our captain, who hadn't been too over the top in terms of asking the question, had told him he'd been elbowed in the head, and they'd point blank ignored it. And all they'd said in the pre-season, well, we need to communicate. And they hadn't checked it, and our bench was going mad. And I know lots said, but if you are going to take loads and loads of time, get the decision right. Because it's unexcusable. And I said, would the referee be happy to phone Fraser to apologise? And they said, oh, no, that's not in the protocol. But actually, some of these referees admitting that the game is really complicated, it is really fast, there is a lot happening, and sometimes they make mistakes, is really healthy. And that's sometimes the frustration is you get flat batted and no, you can't talk to us like this, you can't do that. We were the most penalised side last year, Dan Bigger, for shouting at the referees, and we haven't given one of those penalties away this year, touch wood. Tell the lads, Dingers. And because that was one of their big protocols was during the summer where you can't be shouted at, you can't, the manner in which you talk. And although Fraser swore, he actually said it in the right way, and they still didn't check him being elbowed in the head. So I was pretty annoyed about that, and I'd rather, if they're going to take time, because there's lots riding on it, there's league points riding on it, and we all know, in terms of the situation, the pressure the coaches are under, etc. There's a lot riding on it. I'd rather they took their time and got it right. To take their time and still get it wrong is probably the most frustrating thing.
I think just on that, there's a follow-up point, which is how does that get communicated? So if you're watching at home on the TV, you can hear the dialogue, right, between the referee and the TMO. You can do that in the stadium if you've invested in a ref mic, but I don't think as a sport we do a good enough job of explaining those decisions sometimes, both for understanding and for clarity. And the problem is when you take so long to decide, you don't want to take up any more time explaining it, but somehow we've got to get that bit right, I think, in the sport to make it clearer.
Gentleman down the back there.
I'll come down there next.
Hello, Phil. It's one for Phil. Following up on the last one, there's been a few reports in the press about Courtney's future. Could you give us an update, please, on how Courtney's doing?
Courtney's pretty good. He did a full training session, what day is it today? Tuesday. So yesterday he did the full training session, which was fairly live. The forwards units was live maul. It wasn't full tackle. We don't often go full contact, but there was enough in it that would challenge him. His day off today, so I haven't seen how he's come back from that. There's a new, for those people probably already know, but there's a new protocol in terms of the graduated return to play, it's called, from concussion, and it's much more rigorous, as you saw from Mark's presentation, in terms of the concussion issues that have been coming to the fore with legal proceedings and such. And so we're trying to look after the players in the best way possible. The medical staff are very, very good at that. And as soon as there's any symptoms, whether they're related to the concussion or not, that rules people out. And as such, it's been a slow process for Courts, and I think he's been pretty frustrated by it. But he's trained fully Monday, Tuesday thus far this week, and hopefully, he's available for selection at the weekend.
I think somebody put their hand up down here. Is it?
Yeah, I'll just start to say the Barbars game. I thought it was one of the most enjoyable afternoons I've had. I wonder if what your autopsy of the game was. What's your opinions? Is it something they could do again, or what?
I spoke to John Spencer afterwards, and the Barbarians actually. There's a couple of years ago where they said, what's the position in the professional calendar for the Lions? What's the position for the Barbarians? And actually, they are integral to the game because they are the bastion of the free-flowing jouet that is so entertaining. Coupled with the fact that over the last 4 weeks or 3 weeks, they've given us a home fixture that everyone's enjoyed. They've given the opportunity for Luther and Woody to really exit the Gardens on a high. They've given Bath a home game. They've given Quins a home game, and actually they've stepped in at a time to show how valuable they are to the world game. Whether that happens in the future, again, I don't know, because nobody knows what the league's going to look like next year. Nobody knows what the cup competition's going to look like next year. So in terms of how many free weekends there are, I don't know. I'll be very open to it in terms of getting sides here to play that sort of a game. It is, from my point of view, a tough game for the lads. We said we wanted to prepare for it like a Premiership game in order to prepare for the Gloucester game. Now, you can say that as much as you want, but the lads still know that there's no Premiership points on offer, that you are going to get caught up into that sort of way of playing. And I think, on the whole, there's part of me thinks we should have won that 80-0, and there's part of me thinks that was the best result because it gave everybody a hit out, it gave everyone an opportunity, and it was actually a very entertaining spectacle, and it was actually refereed in according to what the game was. So I do think I'm open to that. I don't know how that looks like in the future. And I think from an autopsy of the game, it exposed a lot of the things that we're trying to work out of our game in terms of how loose we were potentially with the ball, giving too many penalties away, not defending a maul, not scoring too many mauls, etc., etc., etc. But we can talk about them as much as we want during the week. We have to put in 3, 4, 5 weeks, months to make sure that we get that ironed out of our game and we get better at it. We can talk about it as much as we want until we practice it under pressure, until we do it in games, it's irrelevant. So there was elements of our game that have been really consistent throughout the year, but I did think it was a really worthwhile venture.
Any more questions? One down here.
You go.
That's it, send the younger one.
He was nearest.
Thanks. Could I just ask about Joanno Augustus? Is it inevitable, as I've read, that he will return to South Africa at the end of this season, or might he still be here next year?
I think it's it's not inevitable that he will return to South Africa. Dowson can talk about his impact around the squad, but he's become a very, very valuable member of the squad, clearly a supporter favourite. We've got no intention of letting Joanno go anywhere. And quite frankly, I think he loves it here and is enjoying his time and definitely doesn't want to draw that to a close. So I think that's rumour rather than certainty.
There's another question come in from Adrian Mackenzie. Will the Loughborough Lightning team rebrand as Northampton Saints women's team? Mark, you're fresh from Twickenham today on that subject of ladies' teams and Loughborough Lightning, so over to you.
Yeah, look, this is semantics, but I'd argue through our partnership that Loughborough Lightning are already the Saints women's team. That's the reason we formed the partnership. People say there's a lot in a name, and I understand that. We don't expect to change the name in the immediate term. What we're focused on at the moment in partnership with Loughborough is making sure that we're part of the next iteration of the Premier 15s competition, which starts next year. This might sound odd to those of you that haven't followed that process, but the Premier 15s basically has asked, and the RFU have asked every one of the clubs and anyone else who wants to join the league to essentially tender for a position in that league. So I think something like 16 clubs have applied for what's going to be 8 or 10 spots. We've applied, we were down there today presenting our case. We're very optimistic that we're going to be part of that structure. And once we have that certainty, it enables you to get into more and more of the detail around how you evolve that relationship for the future. So we're keen to be in the mix in the league. And this season we're playing, I think, a minimum of 5, maybe more games here. And you're going to see that partnership deepen and strengthen over time.
I've got 2 questions for you, Mark. When will we get to know whether we've been included, and how long does it last for, the agreement?
We're hoping to hear before the end of December. So, what are we now? We're still November, aren't we? End of next month. And historically, what they've done is they've granted a license to participate in the league for 3 years. They've sort of done that twice. From this point, it's indefinite. So if you're in, you're in. And then you can build successfully. There's a lot that needs to go into the professionalisation of the women's game, the commercialisation of the women's game. So if we're in, we've got hopefully a long run at being successful on the pitch and successful off the pitch.
Thank you. This lady here. He's on his way. He's a bit slow, this lad. Thank you, Jack.
In a follow-up to what you've just said, on the 18th of February, we've got a clash. That it's down as Loughborough Lightning at 3 p.m. and we're playing Sale at 3 p.m.
Yeah, as you know, we've just been through a long-winded fixture rescheduling set of discussions with Premiership Rugby, trying to come up with a calendar that works for the back half of the year. After the loss of Worcester and Wasps. That is now going to be a double header, so we're going to play both games on that weekend. That will be announced formally in due course, but because our games have got moved around for Saints, we've had to change a couple of the fixtures that had been orchestrated for Loughborough Lightning. So that's going to be a really great occasion. I think both sides are playing Sale, so it'll be a fantastic double-header and hopefully a chance for lots of Saints supporters to stay behind and see some women's rugby after that game.
Any more questions? Okay, there's one online here from Dave Jackson. After the successful replacement of the Worcester game with the Barbarians match, can I ask what is planned to replace the lost Wasps home game? Is that in March, would it be?
I think originally it was going to be in March, but as I've just said, that because the season has been restructured, everything got moved around. We're working on this at the moment. It's really nice to hear that the Barbars game was well received. I've got to be honest, I think that set quite a high bar for replacement matches. That's going to be difficult to replicate, not just because it was the Barbarians, but also because that became such a special occasion to say thanks to Woody and thanks to Luther and farewell to Biggs. We're working on options. The availability of weekends depends a little bit on how we progress through the Premiership Cup. So we're now waiting on a few results there. Typically, if we have a home knockout fixture, they would often be outside of the season ticket. We would probably do something with that. If we ended up having a home semi-final, we need a few results to go our way for that to be the case. If we're not in the semi-finals, it opens up a couple of windows, so we would look to do something there. And look, with these choices, we're trying to do a couple of things, right? We're trying to ensure that you, as our most loyal supporters, have something to come and engage with that you're passionate about down here at Franklin's Gardens. And we're also desperately trying to protect that revenue, given the fine line that we're walking from a commercial and financial perspective at the moment. So as soon as we've got clarity and we've got something orchestrated, as ever, we'll communicate that as clearly as we can. But we don't have anything locked in at this second. It will come in time.
Okay. Is that right, James? Oh, good.
Oh, this is one for Phil and Fraser. Possibly a little bit simplistic, but until a couple of seasons ago, Saints would invariably play downhill towards the cinch stand, I think it's called these days, in the second half. Over the last couple of years, it seems to be the exact opposite. How does it actually work on the day? Who kicks which way, and what do you prefer?
So essentially how the process works is that I think it's about 50 minutes before kickoff. The captain will be called by the refs and we will go and do the toss. I would have, if I was captaining the side, I would have already been out and had a look at the conditions, and that tends to be the thing that influences that decision. It will be based off wind, potentially if there's the sun involved and if that's going to go behind the stand by the end of the game. I wouldn't necessarily factor in the hill. I think if we were playing at Bedford Blues at Goldington Road, that would be factored in. but here, fortunately, our pitch is pretty good. But that's how the process goes. I think that commonly we're a side that looks to kick off first, to try and get into the game early, essentially, and then that would be my personal preference, and then my personal preference would be to play against the wind first half, and then second half to have it with it behind your back. So that's kind of how it works, and that's my personal preferences in terms of the coin toss. I don't know if you've got anything to add there, Dowse.
I'd always rather come down the hill. No, that was just what was done when we played because it became a bit of a thing. I think now it's way more, I want to use the word scientific, in terms of Fraser taking into account the conditions, taking into account the fact we kick off, which means they either kick it back to us, which gets us into our game, or they kick it off and we get a restart around about the halfway or the 10, so we're straight into our attacking game. Take into account the sun, all those bits and pieces as well. And we talk about all the time in terms of that game drivers group is how we want to start the game and what it looks like at different grounds as well. So there's a lot more thought now that goes into it than when we played and deciding whether to run down the hill because we're tired in the second half.
Yeah, one more down there.
Fraser, what's your honest opinion of the season so far?
It's a very good question. It's actually what Dowse asked me about 2 hours ago. Yeah. I think that I would very much agree with what has been said previously. I think that we, unfortunately, have been a bit too inconsistent. And I know that that's the very easy answer, but there are moments, and we are showing a lot of moments in games that give a lot of promise and show how good we are, or can be, because we're working to the point that we are. I think from the preparation we go through in the week, we're preparing in all the right ways, and I think that, unfortunately, a few of those games, as Dowse has said, we didn't quite pull over the line, which is the frustrating side of it. The thing I will say is that it is a long season, and there is a lot to be said for timing it right. I think at the back end of last year is a great example where everything finally came together, and there's always going to be progression throughout the season, and you don't want to be a side that is dying off towards the end. And I think because of the group we've got, the attitude we have as a group around getting better constantly, and that's coupled up with the coaching team we've got, that's inevitably going to happen, that we will get better throughout a season. So, yeah, my honest answer is that, as frustrating as it is that we haven't won those few games that we should have, I believe that if they were to be played in March and April, that we would. Out of 10. It would be a 6.5 for me out of 10.
Right, thank you, Fraser. Thank you. Well, hold on, there's one on here. From Adrian McKenzie. Will there be future opportunities for me to apply to join the supporters engagement group?
For those of you that don't know, this season we formed a supporters engagement group. That's a group of loyal fans, largely season ticket holders, who come together a few times a season to hear some of the things that we're thinking about from club level, and importantly, feedback, supporter view. The simple answer to the question is yes. The folks that are have been selected to be part of that group, I think, Tim, shout if I'm wrong, I think it's like a 2-year term. And so there'll be some rotation and refreshment of that group over time. It's been extremely helpful so far. So we're acting on a number of bits of feedback that we've had. People asked for a band back in the Rodber after matches. That's back here. People asked for more entertainment at half time. We're working on that.
People asked for an open day, which we are planning for February or March to provide another point of engagement with the club. So it's been really helpful, and yes, there will be opportunities in the future.
Good, thank you. Any more questions from the floor? No? No? Well, there's one more on here just come up. What are the minimum requirements to define our season 22-23 as a success? That's probably you, Phil, isn't it?
We've spoken a lot about developing and getting better, and one of the things I remember from, particularly vividly from last season, is coming back on the bus from Welford Road feeling that we could have, should have, would have been slightly better in that space, and had the opportunity the following week. So on that premise of getting better, I'd like to be in a situation where we're at home doing that, not losing clearly, but at home in a semi-final. And the whole thing we talked about in pre-season was that, and maybe I was naive, it was that we wanted to kick on, that we wanted to go harder, that we wanted to be better, that we wanted, as we mentioned earlier, that this group, this very talented group, could then take the next step to be in the top two to get a home semi-final. There is invariably, regardless of how smooth the change has been from Chris to myself in terms of that evolution, there is going to be changes, and that does take time to adapt. And we have not won the games that we probably should have done, which Fraser alluded to. But again, we're only just halfway through the season, and I think we will continue to get better. So if we got to the top four and lost in an away semi-final, would that be a success? I'm a competitor and I want to win stuff, so probably not. Would it be a failure? Probably not. So I think it's a very tricky question to have a very succinct answer to. But I think with the quality we have in the squad in terms of the depth, the PRC is something that I'm really, really keen to get stuck into. And hopefully you can see that in the way the lads are prepared. I'm excited by our European group, and I'm excited by some of the players' attitudes to it. Lucan has unabashedly come up to me and said that this is the tournament that he was most excited about playing in because it's the tournament against some of the best players in the world. He is a very ambitious young man, and he wants to take the mantle off Will Skelton, to be honest. And so that, you know, I find that from a coaching point of view very exciting in terms of his attitude to that European adventure. From a personal point of view, it's the tournament that I have the fondest memories of. But fundamentally, this group, the recruitment we do, the conversations I have with Mark is about winning. And Fraser would, I'm pretty sure Fraser would back me up that everyone in the group wants to win. I appreciate it's not been smooth sailing, it never was going to be. But we're firmly targeting a top two, and once we get a home semi-final, you know, 80% of home semi-finals are won statistically since the league started doing playoffs. So that's what we're aiming for now. If we don't make it, is that a failure? And we finish fourth and we go away to Saracens or Leicester, I'd still back us any day of the week. So we're going for it.
Thank you, Phil. That's probably a good point to finish on. So unless there's any other questions, one last chance. If you've got a last-minute question, now's the time. Otherwise, we'll wrap up. Okay, well, look, as I said at the beginning, I hope you've enjoyed this. You enjoy it. We certainly do. It's an important event in our calendar, and we'll see you same time, same place next year. Okay, thank you very much.